ask yourself, who would do that to working people? Who would do that when last week 50% of New Zealanders said in a survey they were concerned week to week whether they could meet their basic bills? Who would do that when 2 out of 5 children are living below the poverty line in families where at least one worker has a full-time job? Who would do that when workers all over this country are struggling to make ends meet, are being made redundant, are generally the butt of the global financial meltdown? Who would pass legislation to cut our pay? It's not right, it's not fair, it's not just, and it's not needed. Now my job, and I've only got a few minutes, is just to talk about a little bit about the proposals. And the trouble is, they're technical, but as a package, they are nasty. The first thing, your employer will not have to conclude a collective employment agreement. Your union wants one, they seek one, the employer has to turn up, play all the games, but they're removing the obligation for them to conclude. So what is the point of that? What is the point of going through all the motions if the employer can simply walk away? And not only can they walk away, but they can walk away because they want you on individual employment agreements. They can sit at the table and say, agree with everything you've got to say, but I want individual employment agreements, and they can walk away and don't have to conclude a collective agreement. Number 2, they don't have to offer new workers the collective agreement for the first 30 days. At the moment, when you're new, you don't know the rate, you don't know there's a union, you don't know there's a collective, and there's a protection. You get offered the collective. Well, that's going. And their own cabinet papers say employers can offer new workers less money. They'll maybe offer them a little bit more and remove the redundancy pay, remove the holidays, remove the sick leave. And when you come to bargain your collective and you look around, you'll find a whole lot of workers on individual agreements that are different than yours, and it will be hard to pull them back together and conclude a collective. And number 3, the most nasty bit. The most nasty bit is when your employer decides they don't want to conclude a collective agreement, they can go to the court, and the court can order that the bargaining is finished. And when that happens, the collective that you're on disappears. At the moment, it lasts for a whole year while your union renegotiates and tries to pull it all back together. It disappears and your entire workforce goes on to individual agreements. And when the court says the bargaining's finished, your collective disappears, and there's a 60-day period. Boom, boom, it's like Jaws, isn't it? There's a 60-day period where you can't strike, you can't bargain, and your employer is not bound by the good faith provisions of collective bargaining or of undermining the collective agreement, because there isn't one. So for 60 days, your rights are frozen and their rights are complete. They can come out and offer individual agreements, and workers can't strike, can't bargain, and the collective you're on has disappeared. So that package, hard to frame, hard to articulate, hard to tell people about, is a very nasty package. And the thing that you need to remember is the government's cabinet papers say this will enable them employers to drive down your pay. And that, my friends, is not what we need at this time in this economy when people are already struggling. Now the other things, they're even removing things like the tea break and the lunch break. Who would do that? Who would remove the entitlement for working people to have a tea break and a lunch break? So these changes are important, they are huge, they are bad for us, they aim to humiliate workers, and we won't put up with them. We will campaign through these law changes if they get passed, through to the next election. It's time to change this government and bring in a government that does respect working people. That does respect working people, that does value your contribution to the New Zealand economy, that understands that working people are citizens of this country as well, and that work rights are important for our well-being.